Hello and welcome to Climate Talks. I'm Vidya Rana from ADPC. On the show today, we are going to talk about applying a gender lens to climate actions and why it matters. As climate change continues to happen, heat waves, floods, cyclones, and droughts are likely to become much more frequent and intense. While the impacts of climate change will be felt across all sectors and by everyone, it's without a doubt that women are and will be affected disproportionately before and after a disaster. According to a rapid gender analysis of the cyclone Amphan that struck Bangladesh in 2020 in the thick of COVID-19 pandemic, over 800,000 women, including 49,000 pregnant women, were affected. South Asia has a combined population of nearly 2 billion people, of which over 48% are women. A variety of day-to-day activities undertaken by women are directly linked to stable environmental conditions. Take, for example, the role of women in agriculture. Depending on the country, they are involved in various activities, starting from planting, weeding, post-harvesting, rearing animals, or weaving or mending nets for fishing. Deadly heat waves are frequent in South Asia. During harvesting activities, women have to spend long hours working under the sun. And water shortage actually forces them to travel far distances and fetch it. The expected increase in heat waves will affect women's health and livelihood. There are many more examples we can actually cite from this region. It is also true that there is overwhelming support among a certain group of people for the idea of gender equality and women empowerment. However, we see that public perception of the gendered impacts of climate change is different. The understanding of this gap is still limited at various levels. That actually hinders the path to progress. In today's climate talks, we will try to look into some of these aspects and discuss the value of applying gender lens to climate actions and especially why it matters. We have three experts with us who have been working very closely on these issues. From Bangladesh, we have Dr. Mumita Tanjeela. She is the chairperson of the Department of Sociology at East West University, Dhaka. Welcome to Dr. Mumita.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
From Nepal, we have Bhawana. She's ADPC's Gender and Inclusion Specialist. Welcome, Bhawana. And from Pakistan, Nazima Shaheen is joining us. She's Gender and Climate Change Specialist at Concern Worldwide. Welcome to you, Nazima. So, Bhavna, let me start it from you. As I was saying, that there is a growing acknowledgement that women are disproportionately impacted by climate change and disasters. Is this really happening, or it is just a perception? Bhavna.
Thank you, Vidya, for a question. It's almost cliche in saying that women always bear an unequal burden of climate change, but it's worth repeating, because it's happening in reality, quote unquote. It's not just a perception. And even more in the region we live in South Asia, which is no different compared to other regions. And as Vidya in intro basically gave a background that we have seen women not just working in the field doing a whole range of agricultural activities, but they are also a manager of natural resources. We have seen them collecting waters for family, for community, collecting non-timber forest products, as well as fuel woods for heating and energy. And in other words, what I mean by saying that they are heavily dependent on natural resources. Basically, rural South Asia women are heavily dependent on natural resources for their livelihood, and how this is connected in the context of climate change. And we have seen the pattern of climate change, droughts, heat waves, cyclone, erratic rainfalls, all these basically make women's task more difficult. How? Increasing their workload and then putting more stress on their physical and psychological being. And more than anything, if you really look, the female mortality rate in disasters. I think they gave some example, but I would like to bring two examples here. In 1991, Bangladesh cyclone, I think about 59% of deaths were, it's female mortality, with deaths were for women. And in Asian tsunami, it's 70%. So that basically gives us a context that how women are affected by the impact of climate change. But then the question remains, why it is there? And I would like to say it's there because the climate risk and vulnerabilities is very much interconnected with women's, the gender inequalities. And these inequalities basically affect and severely affect women's resilience and adaptive capacity. And oftentimes, these inequalities act as obstacles to limit women's options for climate adaptation. There are many examples we can cite, but then I won't go into details. But these things that we really need to understand, it's very much interconnected with inequalities. And these inequalities basically can be divided, I would say, broadly into two categories: normative barriers or obstacles, which is basically associated with socio-cultural norms. So many do's and don'ts for women, actually. If you really give a deep thinking, you'll get to know. And a very important thing, when we talk about adaptation, we also know that adaptation requires behavioral change. And definitely behavioral change is very much associated with cultural and gender norms. Another barrier is structural barrier. We've seen that there's unequal access to basic rights when it comes to gender inequality. Just to highlight the statistics, in our region, in South Asia, if we look at the female labor force participation in agriculture, it ranges basically from 60 to 80%. And the legal policy for the same agricultural land, solo or jointly for women, is less than 10 to 20%. And it's, you can see the knock-on effect with this. How would women get access to credit facilities? It's not just about the credit facility. If the most productive resources like land is not being jointly or solely owned, or she doesn't, or a women do not have control of that in decision making. And there are similar barriers like access to innovation and technology, and that basically limit women's capacity, and definitely their resilience powers get low, as well as we see very few women in decision-making tables. I mean, there is very few women when it comes to making decisions, both at household, community, or at public space. I think that's how I would like to end it for now. And
Bhawana, let me turn to Dr. Mumita. I mean, from your response, what I can feel that there is a strong evidence that women are disproportionately impacted by disasters. However, the perception is, I would again say, this different. So, Dr. Mumita, would you please like to tell us that what is the reason behind this?
Well, Vidya, thank you for raising such a vital question or issue in this discussion. Actually, it is all about gender relations, as Bhawana was telling, that it is well acknowledged that climate change is not a gender neutral phenomenon, and that's why gender matters. And here I would like to point out 4 critical issues that we need to consider. Firstly, men and women have very different relationship with the environment. And secondly, environmental degradation that has different impact on men and women. And thirdly, I would say environmental action, conflict, discourse, those are very much gendered. And finally, environmental institutions surely very much gendered. So let me explain a bit why men and women have different relationship with the environment. Because particularly in South Asian society, we see a clear gender division of labor, and they have different roles and responsibilities like productive and non-productive activities, commercial and non-commercial works. Moreover, women's additional household responsibilities during any kind of crisis period. This actually make women more closer to nature, particularly the South Asian region where we are mostly dependent on natural resources for our livelihoods. And ultimately, this influence a gender differential impact on climate change. And another vital issue we need to consider, that is women's less or limited access and control over natural resources. Due to that, women face restriction and land rights, economic, social, and institutional, also legal constraint. And there, and also feminization of poverty. I think you all know about the term feminization of poverty, and limited access to support services, as Bhavana mentioned, and all those together shape their vulnerability. And finally, one point I would like to mention, that is women are less number in decision making position in every aspects of their life or social life, and which is responsible for gender nature of institutions. That institution can be community level or national level, and that limits their adaptation opportunities. That's I may say these are the main basic reasons for gender differentiate impacts of climate change. Thank you. Right now, I want to stop here. So later on, maybe we can discuss more about the issue.
Thank you, Dr. Mumita. Let me turn this discussion over to Nazima. We can see that as compared to 10 years ago or maybe 15 years ago, there is more discussion about gender equality, women empowerment. Do you see that this concern at policy level or at expert level is being translated into actions at community level? Nazima.
Thank you so much, Vidya, for this very important question. So coming to differential impacts of climate change, especially, significant socioeconomic impacts on women, which affect them disproportionately in various domains of, for instance, agriculture, livelihood, food security, mental health, water and sanitation in South Asian region. These are more acknowledged at a global level, along with the realization that women's equal participation in climate change decision making is fundamental to just climate policies according to their needs. And perhaps this is the main reason for formation of Women and Gender Constituency at UNFCCC in 2009, where now there are around, I think, 33 organizations are member of this constituency, and some of them actually are based in South Asia. For instance, I think 8 of them are based in India, 2 are actually in Bangladesh. And I would say to some extent, the member organizations or advocates of this constituency has helped in translating the just climate actions as positive change at local or regional level, including South Asia. But on other hand, I would say at ground level, the major challenge is, lack of gender data, or in technical language, gender analysis for climate emergency or DRR or climate adaptation and climate resilience programs. And because of, lack of such data, women differential vulnerabilities, whether sociocultural or even institutional, are not addressed the way they should be. Hence, translation of such, the positive change in terms of addressal of women needs is relatively slower. The programs, on the other hand, which do such analysis, and I will mention in later part, who do such analysis and prioritize women needs, are found to be much more impactful and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazma. Of course, there must be reasons that why global level concerns and regional level concerns are still not being translated into actions. Since you were talking about programs, and I will like to go to Bhawana, that ADPC has recently launched Care for South Asia project which is funded by World Bank. So how ADPC is planning to put a gender lens to climate actions through this project? Bhawana.
Care for South Asia, funded by World Bank, has gender inclusion as a cross-cutting thematic area, where the overall goal is to contribute to an enabling environment for gender-responsive, climate-resilient policies, which, in other words, is gender-friendly and interventions. And we have like 4 key sectors areas that we're looking at in 3 countries: Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan. We have agriculture, integrated water resource management, transport infrastructures, and planning and finance. We don't have transport sector in Pakistan, but other than that, we have these key sectors in all 3 countries. And basically, when it comes to gender, we are trying to adopt both integrated and strategic gender approach. We have 4 major components of the gender thematic areas in the project itself. We'll start with identifying the gender gaps, basically doing the policy review and assessment at macro level. At the same time, we'll be doing a consultation with different stakeholders, including sectoral line ministries, departments of the pilot countries, as well as mapping of gender landscape, where we would basically see what programs have worked so far, what are the best practices, and what haven't worked, those things. Aside from that, we'll has a big component of capacity development, and we'll be working with government stakeholders as well as civil societies and other non-governmental sectors in building the capacity. And here, with regard to gender, we'll develop a gender action plan to support line ministries and government to integrate gender in their sectoral policy and guidelines. Aside from that, we would be also developing training modules. We'll roll out the training in ground, as well as offer electronic sessions, e-learning sessions. And with all this learning, we would also generate more knowledge sharing at regional level and disseminate it through policy dialogues, basically focus on gender with developing specific methodology related to gender and vulnerability in these key sectors, as well as doing some analytical work and developing the guidelines and tools. So these are basically the 4 streams of work that we're trying to mainstream. And as other panelists said, that it's also a need to generate more data and informations with regard to gender and climate change. So probably that this project, gender work, would help government and sectoral line agencies to take gender-informed decisions for policies and investment.
So, Bhawana, if we look at the past, we see that in this region, preparedness and response system have been substantially improved. And Dr. Mumita, especially if we look at Bangladesh, Bangladesh is considered a leader in managing and preparing for disaster and in response. There's a recent example when Cyclone Fani hit Bangladesh and India. Millions of people were actually saved from, and there were many losses were there, but as compared to before, losses were different. So do we see that when these systems are being improved and governments are trying to put in more efforts and projects like Care for South Asia and Concern Worldwide, different projects are really producing good results. Do you think that vulnerability gap between women and other groups is also reducing because of that overall progress? Dr. Mumita?
Well, thank you, Vidya. Yes, I am a bit optimistic. I think you can be optimistic in this regard. Actually, if you compare with the situation with earlier period or past. Yes, I can give you many examples from Bangladesh, and particularly in disaster management or DRR issues, and also climate change adaptation initiatives. And some positive changes already been happened with the livelihood and lives of Bangladeshi women, and through acquiring different kind of knowledge, preparing better management system and for the upcoming disasters. And particularly they are involved in many income generating activities for betterment of their livelihood. And the women already been sensitized with the climate change, and they are taking many initiatives, and particularly this happened due to government. I must say government initiative and many non-government initiative as well. And women, they are actually at their household level and community level now, they are more prepared for any particularly small scale disaster than before. And the community women are engaged in early warning system and awareness raising program within the community. And now are, so they are more confident after engaging income generating activities as well. And capacity building activities are ongoing for a union level disaster management committee to different government and non-government through different government and non-government actors. And in that case, I would like to mention one particular example, that is Cyclone Preparedness Center. Since you were mentioning about the last cyclone, and you already saw that is how Bangladesh managed, and particularly the region that is the region actually mostly cyclone are affected by cyclone. So and I must say the women are working as an active agent of this activities like disaster management program or climate change adaptation activities. So they are the forefront, I must say, and those actually reduce the vulnerable women's vulnerabilities than before, I must say, and there are evidence actually. So women are not merely the victim of climate change or disaster; they are actually the active agent to change the situation. Thank you.
I must say that given an opportunity, women can really produce great results. I mean, I was just wondering, I wanted to understand, Nazima, that what is the situation in Pakistan? Do you think there are more efforts to mainstream gender into climate change actions and disaster risk reduction?
Thank you, Vidya. At policy level, I think we need more gender and climate sensitive ideas from government, and also implementation of intervention and evidence-based research. And I think this is similar to situation in other South Asian countries. And I think as Bhawana mentioned that that's why gender action plan I think would really be very helpful for projects like CARE. And I think such initiatives should include, sensitization, awareness raising, capacity building of policymakers to make key policies inclusive of gender, so that they should address, the just climate initiatives. At the program level, there have been some initiatives of meaningful inclusion of women at community level. For instance, I would like to quote one of pioneer FCDO funded project on building disaster resilience in Pakistan program, and there have been efforts of meaningful inclusion of women at decision making level at community level through various activities, for instance, formation and implementation of gender equality strategy and action plan, based on comprehensive gender analysis in various sectors. For instance, community-based disaster risk management, climate resilient infrastructure, sustainable livelihood, climate smart agriculture. But certainly we need to have more, sort of connecting dots between what's happening at ground level initiatives and what's happening at policy level. So that's where we need to have some sort of, complementarity.
Okay, before I go to Bhavna to ask her that what kind of challenges we face in mainstreaming gender into policies and planning, I would request my audiences, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat box and we will try to answer to your questions. So coming back to Bhavna, there is a national level effort, and then, of course, we also see that regional level efforts are also need attention. So, do you think that South Asian countries are really coming together to discuss that how they can mainstream gender into planning process so that policies are implemented at community level, there are better results? Bhavna?
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting and great question, I would say. If you look at globally, there are policies in place. I mean, I can name especially after 2015 Paris Agreement, UNFCCC has been forcing COPs, that's Conference of Parties, and all the countries in South Asia are part of COP, and they are obliged to fulfill the commitments, and hence, best to fulfill the commitments, they have included gender analysis in their national climate change policies. I've been doing the review, particularly for 3 countries. They have a climate change gender action plan already. It was developed in 2013, and we don't have it for Pakistan, as Nazima said, but there are things in place. And if you look at the NAPAs and LAPAs of these countries, adaptation plans, there are mention of gender either as recognitions or acknowledgement as beneficiary or stakeholders. And most recently, the NDCs submitted to UNFCCC's, all these countries have included gender. And I was reviewing the documents prepared by CARE International recently, and I saw that in 2016, all the submitted of all the submitted NDCs, only 40% had reference to gender. But now this year, which they have like 56%, which is already there. Good work has been done, but then how are we translating this into practical actions in ground is a bit of challenge, and probably we'll discuss more on that. But then there's also good work that have been done, particularly in Nepal. I would like to take an example of agriculture sector. Fiscal year 2017-18, the total budget allocated for agriculture sectors was Nepalese rupees about 30.40 billion. Sorry, I didn't come up with USD figures. And of that total, 3.3 million has been specifically allocated for women and gender-specific activities in agriculture and climate change. That's already something happening in ground, and that's, if you do a simple math, it's already at 10%. That's quite some of money. But we need to do more in terms of translating these policies into actions. With regard to challenges, there are challenges which probably we'll discuss later. I would also like to hear from other panelists of their country context.
So before I actually go to other panelists with next question, actually I have a very interesting question here in the chat box, and I would like panelists to respond to it. That Naseem bin Rahman is saying that, can social and gender impact analysis in South Asian countries improve gender representation in climate change? So who would like to take this question? I will leave it open to you. Maybe Dr. Mumita, if you would like to take this question.
Okay, thank you. So yes, it is very interesting question indeed. Surely, gender impact analysis, that is that it can be vulnerability assessment analysis or any kind of gender analysis, that is very much important. And if we can incorporate those gender analysis, so that can be improve overall gender representation. That means in earlier discussion I told that is there is our institutions are very much gendered. So whether you are considered that is a community level institution or it is national level institution. So if we do this such kind of gender analysis, then we can understand the gap, and then it is possible to fill in the gaps. And that's why gender representation, that does not mean that only representation of women, but it can be we actually want a gender responsive system. So a proper gender analysis can do that, surely.
Thank you, Dr. Mumita. Actually, I wanted to
And
come to
Nazima
you,
can add.
Nazima,
Yes.
because I know you're already in the process of doing the gender audit in Pakistan, Sindh province. So would you please like to add something?
Sure, thank you,
Right.
Vidya. Basically, with regards to social and gender analysis, is very pivotal to actually, if we want to do some sort of, gender inclusive sort of climate actions. For instance, I would like to quote the example of the project which I mentioned earlier, the FCDO funded project, which where Concerned Worldwide took the lead in CBDRM component, community-based disaster risk management component. And when I did the gender analysis in 9 districts from 3 provinces of Pakistan, then actually it was very clear that why meaningful participation of women at community level or even at district level is not, it is can't be ensured because A, they need negotiation and leadership skills. B, they need some sort of, men allies. So that's why we actually tailored our approach. We actually designed the gender equality strategy and action plan, where there were comprehensive training package for capacity building of these women representative at community and district forum levels to build their capacity on negotiation and leadership skills so that they can speak about their needs and so that their voice is inclusive and heard at decision making levels, such levels, whether they are community level forums. And then engage with men approach, because this is patriarchal culture even in most of South Asian region countries. So until and unless we don't make we don't aware or the men who are counterpart of these committees or forums, that they need to be more supportive to the voices of women, we can't actually claim that such initiatives are successful. So that's why, I mean, from where this data came, actually from gender analysis. So I think this is very much necessary that we should apply such lens from beginning of or designing of programs.
Thank you. Thank you, Nazma. And Bhavna, I have my all-time favorite question for you. And this is from Asad Haq. And he's saying that involving women in different income generation, generating activities in agriculture. So is it increasing the workload of women? Or since they are busy at the household level, or creating discrimination in workload? So would you like to
Well,
respond? Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
go
it's
ahead.
an interesting question, and it's like two school of thoughts. I mean, in every aspect, we try to see whether or not women's workload has been increased if they are being empowered. I mean, that's two school of thoughts. But I would say that it depends on the context, and we can't generalize it. It depends. I mean, also understanding the fabric of the society. And the culture, how it has been. If the if the women in that community is very much interested to involve, then the workload will be managed by themselves and there will be no complaint. And that's a very common sense thing. But then I don't know, I mean, who would say, but if in other contexts, if the particularly community members are against involving them, or women themselves are not interested to get engaged in income generating activities, then probably that will come as an excuse of a workload increase and all. But these days, with the social mobilizations, with the community-based organizations, women are trying to engage in all these kind of activities. And also they have seen that with the additional household income they bring to the community, the rise in status, and there has been studies which has been directly correlated to as the income of the household been increased, it has a positive impact on food security, children's educations, and basically, if we engage women in income generating activities, that aspect, health aspects, education aspects, and also the food security and nutrition aspects would be covered. But then to see whether or not the workload has been increased, I would say it's completely depend on the context and that particular community or the household or the women. If I
Dr.
answered
Mumita, yeah, definitely. But I would like to understand a little bit more about this topic. It is often understand that, okay, if women are engaged in livelihoods, their household domestic work would be increased, or overall workload would be increased. Why, Dr. Mumita, why people think like that rather than that women will be getting economic development, independence, that is one part of it, rather than taking that angle, why we think that it would be increasing women workload overall? Dr. Mumita, please.
Thank you, Vidya. Very interesting, actually. So it is all about the gender roles. We know, triple roles, and women already being overloaded by their household responsibilities. And this is actually, we consider their extended activities of their reproductive works, and during the climate change or any disaster situation, particularly if I consider current climate change situation, then you can see that is migration, urban-rural migration is another socio-economic consequences of climate change. And in that case, you may see that is how women are taking responsibilities of overall household and also economic activities, because men move first due to any kind of natural disaster that can be for their better livelihood. Men move first, and ultimately all household responsibilities and other responsibilities given to the women's shoulder, and women cannot escape from this situation. And nowadays, you can say, from our country, I can say that women-headed households are increasing in rural areas. This is surely a consequences of climate change situation in Bangladesh. And if I link in line with your question, that is why we are telling that is overburdened rather than this economic empowerment. Actually, men are not sharing household responsibilities. That is the point. It could be a positive way, but women are actually burdened with triple role. That's why actually we are talking about changing gender relations within family or household level, community level, or national level. Without changing that relations, gender relation, it would not be actual benefit for women. Ultimately, it will be the overburden or burdened with many roles. That is actually my point.
Thank you, Dr. Mumita. Another question, actually, I wanted to ask Nazima, since you are working very closely with the communities. When we look at global level and regional level discussion, it's largely about how women are impacted by disasters, which means during disasters, which means that domestic violence increases during disasters. However, if we look at climate change, climate change is going to impact women's day-to-day life. It's not no more about just that when disaster happens. So, is there any work or good example going on where we are just focusing on the impact of climate change on the day-to-day life of women?
I think you pointed out a very, important point that, we shouldn't focus on just one part of a disaster cycle. It should be, ongoing efforts to address women vulnerability or even vulnerability of any, disadvantaged group. So it should be, considered during whole cycle. It should be pre-disaster situation. It should be during disaster. It should be post-disaster situation. So until and unless we don't take it as a development process, I think the problem is not going to be addressed. To be very frank. So this is how I take it. It should be part of all stages of disaster management.
Okay, thank you. There is another question, and actually, we hear this question most of the time that mainly governments are responsible to take care of all aspects of climate change impact and disaster. So, do we really think that government agencies are not doing that much? Of course, they are doing a lot of stuff, but they are somehow lacking, uh, I mean, care or anything. Who would like to take this question?
Can I?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. First and foremost, I have a reservation with regard to this question. I don't believe that government agencies are not taking it that seriously to resolve the mandate. Had it been so, the gender action plan hadn't been developed. The allocation of budget, the example I gave, wouldn't be, in place. Maybe more efforts are required to put in place maybe effective coordination mechanism among cross-sectoral line agencies with regard to government are required. But I don't think that they are not serious in putting gender issues in their mandate. Every now and then we see policy and strategy being developed at policy level. Gender responsive budget has been developed, though it's still evolving concept, but then that's a tracking mechanism for gender responsive budget. So I have a difficulty in kind of completely agreeing that government agencies don't consider it. There may be other pressing issues than gender based on national agenda, but then gender issues has been in their mandate, and it's moving. Maybe it's slowly, but it's moving forward.
Thank you, Bhavana. Um, of course, governments are trying their best, and we see the evidence of their work. And we also hear from different people that maybe there is less awareness amongst women, that they don't really recognize their own rights, and they don't identify differential impacts of disasters. So that might be one of the reasons that things move slowly. So I will actually go to Nazima on this. That have you seen any evidence where we see that maybe women also need to learn more about it, Nazima?
I think basically because these are recently growing terms where, and if we look at the literacy rates between men and women, then definitely in countries like South Asian countries, the ratio of literacy between men and women is quite is less for women and more for men. But even these, growing issues, I think there's more and more awareness is needed, and for that, the mainstream media role is very important, and not just mainstream media role is important, but also, the language in which they communicate the awareness raising or the buzzwords to the very common people or public. That should be to the level that people, especially women, can understand what actually the differential impacts could be of climate change on their lives, whether it's socio-cultural impacts, or whether economical impacts in different sector where they are part of, like agriculture, or other labor force. So I think, yes, the issue is like awareness raising is very much needed, and also the tools are very important, how we actually raise the awareness, considering the level of understanding, and also the literacy rate of these the audience.
Thank you. There is actually, I will come to Dr. Mumita for you, because you are, I mean, you have been working both in rural areas and urban areas. There is a question that women in rural communities sometimes don't know their rights. Do you think that this rural and urban divide, when especially it comes to identifying and recognize your rights, does it exist, or this is just a cliche and it's like both urban and rural women face same problem? Dr. Momita, please.
Thank you, Vidya. Interesting question indeed. Actually, we know that gender is not a homogeneous identity or homogeneous concept. It depends. Since we are talking about rural communities, and surely you see that in rural areas, it's literacy rate and there more gender norms exist there. So that can be an important factor for urban rural divide. But at the same time, if you see the women in slum areas or women in poverty, you may see the difference is not that much that much far. They're in same stance, I think so. So it depends on their context, I must say. But in the since rural women are more, if you see statistics, rural women are more. If you compare with urban women, their literacy rate may be less, and in South Asian region, you may see that is there is a strong gender norms and values always exist. So women mobility is also restricted. So one important issue is women's mobility, and rural areas women's mobility is less than urban areas. So in that context, I could say yes, a little bit differences between there. But on the other hand, you can say you may see the many program projects actually rural centric. If you consider disaster or disaster management or climate change adaptation, mostly are rural centric. We do not see that much programming and program or activities for urban women. It's actually need to investigate whether there is a big gap between urban and rural women, particularly the vulnerable sector. And you know that is all women are not in same stand. So that is the difference. Okay, thank you.
So Nazima, would you like to add to it this about this rural and urban divide, especially when it comes to policy and planning, both at government level and development sector level?
I think, as Mumita said, there is a need to have some more data, but definitely common perception is at policy level, I think whether, I mean, even at, urban areas, there are less women in policy making, decision making level. That's the tragedy, but that's a fact. And I think if there would be any research that would, validate that fact. In rural areas, or maybe the districts who are, or the areas who are more rural based economy, I mean, the contribution of women is more, but actually their participation or meaningful participation at decision where decisions are made, or even the departments, for instance, agriculture department, most of the staff is male, and the outreaching to women who are actually part of this sector is actually a barrier because of socio-cultural norms. For instance, I can quote example of Pakistan. If extension workers are not, women, then actually male extension workers who are going to communicate with the male, farmers. And actually, the women who are majorly part of this agriculture sector, they would, that would be the missing part. I mean, they wouldn't have first-hand information. So, on one hand, policy making level, whether eh, 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 rural urban divide is there, definitely educational gap is there, but at policy level, women representation is much lower, whether they are educated or not, at decision making level. So that's the point I would like to highlight.
Thank you, Nazima. And just linked to this one is that generally when we talk about a farmer, the first image comes to many people's mind is a man. You don't visualize a woman. So, do you think, Bhavna, that this visualization and understanding of uh, different professions makes a difference when we are thinking about policies, despite the fact that women are, a large majority of women are employed in agriculture sector in South Asia. Yet, as Nazma said, that we don't see many women who are part of policy making and who can think from that lens. Bhavna, would you like to respond to it? Thank you.
Yeah, again, going back to the same thing, I mean, that's correct. If we imagine of a farmer, we would, come up with a male farmer. But then I think farmer is like, it's could be both male or female, and if particularly those who have seen the rural setting South Asia, and most of us have basically seen women doing everything when it comes to agriculture. And I already gave the female labor force participation statistics in agriculture, and equally important in other activities areas as well. But then again, at different understanding at the policy level, um, uh, it's also, I think we also need to understand that gender analysis is relatively new concept. It has been almost like for 20 years, 2 decades now. But then compared to, the patriarchal society we live in, where all these gender norms and barriers are kind of bind us, and the perception we have is like things, or the decision making things should be done by only male counterparts. That's thing. And also the capacity, as I said earlier, answering the first question, whether it's perception reality, that because of the structural barriers, women are not having in many parts of the South Asia region that not having access to basic rights. In that case, definitely women representation in decision making, even in the lower tier of the administrative unit, say for example, water user association group, we see only few numbers of women. And basically when these decision making roles comes in,
Yeah, that is very true.
yeah, and
That
the
is very true.
membership.
That yeah,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
so it's
Sorry.
basically even the membership they would approach to the male, so women get already excluded. I think that's how it has been so far, and things are changing.
Well, in addition to progress different stakeholders have made, we see that there are many challenges, starting from data to perception, awareness, rural-urban divide. So I was just wondering, Dr. Mumita, I will come to you, that in terms of specific policy measures, what would be your recommendations for ensuring that future programs are gender responsive?
Thank you, Vidya, for your very good question. Actually, for policy measures, if we consider policy measures, that is very important actually for climate change adaptation. And policy actually translated into programs and other issues. So, first thing there should be very gender transformative and gender informed. Gender and disaster informed policy issues, and one very important consideration that means that is we need a coordinated gender transformative approach to aid integrating gender concern in climate change adaptation, particularly all kinds of policies and practices. And government implementation bodies or international donors agencies, NGOs,
Yeah.
they should be more practical and context specific. That I must say, that is, you cannot
Yeah,
apply
quantification is
everything.
a real
Yes,
issue.
and practical and cooperative in operationalizing mechanism, and particularly gender sensitivity in climate change adaptation. And I must say there is a very Bangladesh already prepared a very good gender action plan for climate change adaptation. It is already prepared, and I think all
Yeah,
government
yeah, Dr. Mimita,
agencies should can take as a base to start activities for gender
absolutely,
sensitive
absolutely.
program and
Hmm.
policies. Thank you.
Hmm. I will
Thank you
quickly
very much.
come to you, Nazima, if you have very brief comments on these policy recommendations.
Okay, just agreeing to gender transformational approach, what Momita has said, I think that begins from women representation at decision-making level, and decision-making is actually about climate action is right at the moment, it is at COPs or where negotiations or the future of climate action is being decided every year. So I think there should be opportunities for more women representation or more women negotiators in that process in delegations, government delegations, especially from South Asian countries who are actually vulnerable, and most of them are actually in top 10, including Pakistan. And actually there are opportunities of capacity building of on negotiations like like organization like we do women environment and development organization, they do such
So you
initiatives.
mean it should be part of the policy,
Yeah.
capacity building and everything.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and actually, second thing, I think it's very important that we need to consider the culture sensitive approaches, considering the patriarchal context. We need to sensitize women, men, policymakers with approaches like this has been very successful in concerned worldwide case like engage with men approach. So I think these
Thank you,
initiatives.
Nazma. We have just 1 minute left, so I will quickly like Bhavna to. I mean, what is your take on this?
Yeah, I basically echo the two fellow panelists version, but then there are four things. Very briefly, I think the first thing is the generation of evidence-based gender and climate change data. We're lacking this in the region. and strengthening capacity of sectoral implementing agencies. Second. Third would be equally allocating gender responsive budget, whether it's 3%, 5%, 10%, depends on government's decision. And finally, last but not least, having a sectoral approach, So I think.
Thank you so much, Bhawana. And I think we had very good discussion at what I understood, that from global to regional to local level, maybe there is now it's the time that we start discussing this issue at local level too. With this, thank you very much and bye for now. We'll see next time.